Welcome to the Tuesday, July 30th, first rendition of the Jake and Joe Tuesday version of the podcast on the RotoWire NFL Podcast Network, brought to you by WynnBET. Jake, it's finally time for us to re-engage our podcasting chops and get started. I mean, this is something we've done now, I think, for the last 4 years together. Mm-hmm. Normally, when the season is going on, we're breaking down all the different free agent pickups that you need to make for your teams. To start, though, as we really get into the NFL grind, we're going to be your, I figure like more like a, hey, crap, the fantasy football season's around. Let's go ahead and get ourselves ready, prepped, and kind of set to go. That's what we're here for. All the other guys are experts. We're here to get those basic guys set.
Yeah, that's been me for the last couple of days. Like, okay, this is real. They're doing a draft while we were in Vegas last week. And yeah, normally, like you said, it's the waiver wire podcast. We're going to run down by position the top waiver wire ads at each position. And, that's really our expertise. But they say, hey, you got to start 6 weeks ahead of time. Think up some show topics. So I thought to myself, what's the first thing that I think of when it's time to really like, okay, the offseason's over. I need to start thinking about drafting, obviously doing best ball drafts and that kind of thing. But the first thing I need is a recap of who changed teams and if their stock is up or down. And that's what we're going to talk about today. And hopefully that is helpful. Hopefully there's some re-listen value that a month down the road, if you're thinking, okay, now it's time for my draft, I can go back and get a catch up on who all changed teams. And yeah, we're just going to go position by position and do stock up, stock down, and see where it goes from there.
And of course, it wouldn't be a major podcast that we do if there wasn't some sort of breaking news. And I think it's best that we jump into it right away. Cam Akers done for this season before training camp really even starts, or I guess it was right on training camp, tearing his Achilles. So, I mean, this is going to be a big deal for the Rams. Yeah. We're going to talk with the Rams more when we mentioned the Matthew Stafford acquisition. But here we are, a top 15 at minimum player, now done for the season. I imagine, hopefully it's not going to happen, but with everything that's going on with the NBA playoffs and a few of these other things, as players readjust to what a normal season might look like, this might not be the end of major injuries to note. So I think the first thing we have to discuss with the Cam Akers news is, what do the Rams do next? Obviously, Akers done for the year, not playing. Is it going to be Darrell Henderson? Is it going to be a guy they acquire off the street? Could we see even more backups going to appear in the case of Xavier Jones? There's a lot of different question marks here, and I'm afraid we don't have many answers at the moment from the Rams.
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of ways that they can go with this, and I guess to even step back a second, I got to put the MD hat on. Someone I thought it was funny got in the RotoWire mentions or tagged us today, like, oh, torn ACL for Akers, and then we had to correct him. Oh, nope, it's a torn Achilles, and the response was even worse then, right? Because the situation, I mean, ACL tears are like starting to become 7-8 month things. Achilles injuries, until seemingly like the last couple of years, have often been career enders. I mean, you see in the NBA, people are starting to come back. Kevin Durant, Klay Thompson now is going to try to do that. Achilles, it's not pretty. So this is real sad because it's a promising young career. I intended on keeping him at like a $21 price tag out of $200 in a keeper league, and now I'm just going to toss him back into the pool because who knows what kind of Cam Akers we'll get when we get back. I mean, we'll eventually have some dynasty formats. Yeah, you hang on to him there. But, so now you have to look ahead. And, of course, like you said, Darrell Henderson is the first option for now. Will they go into the season with Darrell Henderson as their number one, 3-down workhorse back? I doubt that. I mean, right now, I keep wanting to say Derrick Henry, but Darrell Henderson, ADP 137. He's running back 50. Obviously, that has changed. He moves up significantly in the rankings here, and yeah, they're going to sign someone, but you look at who's all out there, and there's just not there's not a ton. I mean, do they bring back Todd Gurley? That was kind of a joke we threw around in the office here. I mean, guys like Le'Veon Bell, Duke Johnson are out there. There's some guys they could pick up off the roster bubble if they were smart. If the Broncos were smart, they'd try to unload Melvin Gordon, right away. That would seemingly be a logical move. But there might be some teams with a surplus at running backs that are looking to unload, and of course, someone like the Rams needs to get after it here. So, do you got any leans on that?
Well, we're not even 5 minutes into our very first podcast in the new season. You're already talking about your crappy keeper league where you're able to just decimate everyone. How is this even possible? How did this happen?
I mean, it was I thought the same thing when I was putting the outline, and that was the first thing. I was like, oh man, my main keeper league, that guy's toast. I'm gonna have to keep like $40 guys. I'm gonna have to keep like Jacobs and Ridley or something, and come in with like less than half my budget toast, because Akers was my best bargain. He was dropped somehow in that dynasty league, picked up off the waiver wire for 21, which is sizable, not cheap, but I figured something keepable if he's ready to have a huge ceiling going into next year. And I mean, he was poised for that career year, and now we don't get to see it. I mean, the Rams kind of looking rough this year. I mean, that receiving core is still solid. They've got some guys on defense, of course, the best defensive tackle in the league. But as a team, this is a pretty big blow, and they're gonna maybe have to set back some of their future in order to get a running back that will keep them competitive this year.
What future do the Rams have? They always tend to trade away their picks anyway and still do fine.
Yeah. Do they have any fourth-round picks left that they can give for Gordon? Gordon would require a fourth, right? Some of these other guys you can probably get away for a sixth, and I'd imagine they haven't traded away all of their sixth yet, but it is the Rams. Who knows? The
only reason I brought up your crappy keeper league is because I wanted to push my own agenda. So I'm going to be doing the Yahoo rankings for RotoWire throughout the entire season. Myself and a couple of other colleagues are doing that. Mm-hmm. So when I saw the Akers news, my first thought was, crap, I got to go update that right away. So for me, Akers removed, obviously not playing for the rest of the season. Henderson was in like the 160 to 165 range. He was a little below Tony Pollard, if you want to bookmark that in your head from a drafting perspective. I moved him all the way up. I believe it's going to be close to the top 100, in the 90 range, 85. So running backs that I would be drafting after Henderson right now: Chase Edmonds, Javonte Williams, which we can discuss a little bit more when we get to the Melvin Gordon thing. Melvin Gordon was directly afterwards, and Damian Harris, who was probably about a round or two lower than that. So pretty sizable jump from Darrell Henderson perspective. I do wonder, and I have an abnormal amount of Rams fans that are friends. I don't know if you have that unfortunate situation, but I was able to talk to a few of them, and it was it wasn't a consensus as to what the Rams would need to do to replace him, but I heard a lot from, okay, we either need a big burly guy or a pass catching guy, which means Henderson can then do one or the other of those roles. It feels a little bit ambiguous to have Henderson be able to do both. Like, he could either be the running guy or the pass catching guy, but can't be both. So I think making lists of who we can acquire is a little bit harder in that sense, because we don't know what the Rams really want to do. When Akers was the most effective towards the end of last season, really when McVay wanted to use him, Akers actually could run a lot of routes, and it wasn't like, oh, here's a screenplay like Derrick Henry does, let him rip off 20 yards. He was actually running legitimate routes. His average depth of target was about 3.5, whereas Henderson, who had the most catches out of that backfield or close to it, Malcolm Brown kind of did some of that stuff too, his average depth of target, Henderson's, was 0.8. So, I mean, that was your screen guy in particular. So if you say, I want to replace Akers and what he did last season, the first thought that comes to mind for me is Boston Scott. I don't know if the Eagles choose to use Boston Scott the way he could be used. I know they've had to use him in past seasons for lack of depth, but you look at that depth chart now, they have Kerryon Johnson, they have Kenny Gainwell, and they have the corpse of Jordan Howard. Like, they have guys that can do X things for that offense. And I wonder if you could get a pick out of Boston Scott in the 5th or 6th round, and that would be a good deal or good bargain. I don't know what his contract would look like, but that's one of the names. We had Alan and Mario kind of a great Twitter exchange about possible replacements. And I do think Duke Johnson of the free agent guys makes the most sense, because he could do the pass catching stuff and Henderson do the running stuff. But Boston Scott was the one I was like, maybe that, or if you could somehow squeeze Marlon Mack out of the Colts. I don't think that's a possibility whatsoever. But let's just say Jordan Wilkins has an insane camp, and you just hear about Jordan Wilkins being like a great RB2 behind Jonathan Taylor, and Hines does his pass catching stuff. Well, Mack's contract is up this year. They didn't really want to pay him last year either. Got lucky with his injury. I think it was the knee, the ACL tear. I could see maybe Mack being moved, but this is one of those situations I think we're going to have to learn more information as training camp progresses, which helps nobody. I'm just going to say right now, Henderson might get pushed to the 4th or 5th round, and I do not want to go to that price tag for him, because I think his role is way too fluid for that kind of price tag.
Yeah, I mean, part of the reason why that price tag is going to go so far up is because you look at the rest of that depth chart. We kind of alluded to earlier, Xavier Jones, he played entirely special teams last year for the Rams. He appeared in 13 games, did not get a single carry. And that's who we list as number 2 on the depth chart right now. And then we have number 3, Jake Funk at least he was drafted. He was a 7th round pick, this past year. So, I don't know. There's just not a whole lot there, and they're going to have to fill in that missing piece sooner or later, one way or another. So I am not going to
mark it here first. Jake does not want the funk.
I do not want the funk.
Jake does not want the funk.
Yeah, perhaps. So anything left to add on on Akers. I mean, I think we've pretty much covered it from most angles. We can speculate about all these trades and different teams that might be looking to unload him, but yeah, I don't think that's going to get us too far right now. And I guess my bottom line is you said 4th, 5th round. I mean, maybe it's not going to go up that much, but that just feels like such a huge overpay for me right now that I'm going to stay away from.
It's not like when Spencer Ware went down, we immediately had Kareem Hunt in like the 2nd or 3rd round of redrafts. That's not the same situation, but I think some people might mistake it for it because, hey, Henderson was a 3rd round draft pick. He's had promise at times. You might want to overreach, especially after the David Montgomerys of the world. Like there just isn't a starting caliber guy past the 4th round that you feel really comfortable with. I love Raheem Mostert, but I understand most people don't. And that's like the end of the line when it comes to starters. You're talking about 6th, 7th, 8th round. So yeah, I think Henderson could be pushed up to that point. I think it's a mistake to do it at least right now until we get more information for what the Rams want to do. This is a great segue though into what our main topic is going to be today for breaking down off-season transactions, kind of the rundown of those. It was a little bit of a lame off-season, I think, of some sorts, whether it be from the cap or teams just able to get some of these guys back relatively cheaply. Juju Smith-Schuster comes to example right away. There wasn't a lot of big names that moved. However, the quarterback position obviously was one of the biggest movers of the offseason. So that being said, Matthew Stafford, I think the biggest quarterback name, and we could talk about if Jimmy Garoppolo were to get traded, because obviously the 49ers drafted Trey Lance. That's not what this podcast is. Maybe down the road we get into some of those rookie guys, but I know Mario and John have done an excellent job breaking all that down. Matthew Stafford, his current ADP is right now 10th among quarterbacks. That sounds about right to me. I think he is like in the range of Aaron Rodgers and Tom Brady. Jalen Hurts is being drafted after him, although marginally in NFFC drafts. I love Ryan. I'm sorry, I don't love Ryan Tannehill. I love Joe Burrow. Ryan Tannehill is also in that range. So keep that in mind when we're discussing Matthew Stafford. This now already boils down to another situation where Matthew Stafford could be without a 100-yard rusher. I think there's like 6 games in the last half dozen years where the Lions, because that's who Stafford was playing for before, actually had a 100-yard rusher when Stafford was playing in the game. That's crazy to me, and it's crazy to me that that curse seems to have carried over to the Rams, at least for this season too.
Yeah, at least when you talk about Matthew Stafford, the pass catching weapons are there. I mean, the receiving core is still solid. Woods, Kupp, I don't know, whatever you're getting out of Deshaun Jackson. Van Jefferson's promising, and Higbee at tight end. So those options are there. He's not going to have it at running back. With Stafford, you could also make an argument that the stock goes up because of the offensive line, right? You know, RotoWire's got the Rams offensive line, fair stability, fair health. Whitworth, Edwards, Allen, Corbett, Havenstein. As number 5 in the league here, so that's definitely a step up. I would say overall stock up because you can only go I guess we're going to try to keep that as a theme: stock up, stock down. You know, with the movement, and usually a lot of guys, the general fantasy rundown is stock down, right? When you're moving, new circumstances, new system, especially for a quarterback. A guy like Stafford, a veteran, tough guy. I'm not too worried about like the whole new system factor going in there, but you know, he's just. I'm not so sure that I would say stock up too much, and I think QB10 might even be a little bit of an overpay when we come to redraft leagues here. I like the weapons, but the guy, he's not mobile at all, and that's not going to suddenly change here at 33. And the Rams game, it might actually feel a lot like Lions games. I mean, they probably have a better defense, but he's going to have to do a lot of it with his arm for them to move the chains and go down, because you're going to see a lot of 2nd and 10, 2nd and 11 if they can't get this running game together here. So Stafford, well, you know, he's the highest ADP quarterback of the players that moved. I don't see him. I almost put him on the same tier as the next guy we're going to talk about, which I think is Carson Wentz, right?
Wow, I mean that's bold. That's great segue, but I just want to double back. Like if Stafford throws for 4,800, like 4,500 to 4,800 range, yeah, probably under QB10. And again, listed the guys that are drafted around that range: Hurts, Tannehill, Burrow, Ryan, Lawrence. I like Lawrence. I like Burrow. I might like Hurts too, more for the rushing factor. NFFC, again, is different than maybe your standard league where you have 6 points per passing touchdown. If you're playing on ESPN or Yahoo or somewhere else, it might be 3 or 4. And that could be the difference because the yardage is going to be higher for Stafford than most of those guys listed. But you're right. If they're lacking a rushing option, and it seems like, at least for right now, if it's Darrell Henderson, the guy, they will be lacking a bit of a rushing emphasis. I do think there's going to be more of a reliance on Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods. Sean McVay can scheme, 3 or 4 yards at will, though. I think he's one of the better coaches out there that can do that. So
I'll give you that.
I think it's maybe less dire than you might suggest, but it is something to monitor, though, for moving forward. So you're right. Let's move over to Carson Wentz. His ADP among quarterbacks right now, QB 17. Again, this is for NFFC formats. It might be different for those best balls out there.
I wanted to clarify because we just kind of slipped an NFFC in there. I personally think that that's the best ADP source that you can be using, and you can adjust it on their website to be able to narrow the range here. If you want to get ADP for the last couple days with the Henderson news factored in, you can do that here. But yeah, the National Fantasy Football Championship, good friends and partners with RotoWire, and yeah, I think that they're all paid pretty high stakes leagues, right? So that's the thing. People have a bunch of skin in the game here when they're trying to. When they're trying to make these picks. So they're going to at least, make educated what they feel like, as opposed to, I'm going to do 100 mock drafts on a free site and that's all going to go in ADP, So that's the one that we're going to use. I just want to clear that up.
Yeah, we're obviously great partners with Underdog as well and a few of these other best ball formats. And they're great too, and we'll probably talk about them more as we do these podcasts. But at least for today, for the ADP purposes, NFFC with the stakes that are on the line, I think in those formats, in those leagues, makes complete sense. So yeah, Carson Wentz list at QB 17. You mentioned in our rundown, and I agree with you, fresh start for Carson Wentz after his flame out with the Eagles. Jalen Hurts obviously kind of came on strong towards the end for them. It's a reuniting of Frank Reich and Carson Wentz, which I think is the biggest pull right now, and a reason why you might have some optimism for him. You have to remember, Carson Wentz was more or less going to be the MVP before he tore his ACL. That, to me, felt like a lock. And since that point forward, we've just kind of seen him fall apart. And we don't know if it's a mental standpoint. We don't know if there's a physical part of it to it. You watch Carson Wentz play. There's some jitters. I think there's an abundance of lack of confidence either in himself or in his team. Does that change now with the comfort of Frank Reich? I'm not sure. What say you, Jake?
I think it will, actually. I think this is the perfect reset for him, the perfect stage of his career. I mean, the guy's only 28 years old, right? And again, he's got that comfort level. We forget Frank Reich. Last year, Phillip Rivers was revitalized at 39. 68% completed passes was the third best of Rivers' career. 4,100 yards, 24 touchdowns to 11 interceptions. He's 39. Wentz is 28. I actually like Wentz a lot. The wide receiver group doesn't pop out a ton on paper, but from last year's show, I was a big fan of Michael Pittman's future. Of course, he's got a deep threat in T.Y. Hilton and serviceable guys like Paris Campbell, Zach Pascal, Jack Doyle, Mo Alley Cox. Those are guys that can go up and get it in the red zone and also help move the chains. And then, Jonathan Taylor, Marlon Mack, even, Nyheim Hines is around. So they're deep at every single position here. Now, the one concern, if I had to kind of come with a concern, is that a lot of the reports, one that say Wentz is looking mobile and looking good, so that's encouraging, but a lot of reports say that they're going to kind of go to quick, short throws a lot in the offense this year. So I don't think that is necessarily fantasy kryptonite, but it's the one knock otherwise. And yeah, I was surprised that Wentz was this far down outside of QB1 territory. I like to punt quarterbacks, and in some of my leagues, especially my hometown league is one of them that I think about, people like to overdraft quarterbacks. Some people are drafting 2 in the first 8 rounds. If I leave a draft with Carson Wentz as my QB1 and load it up on skill players early, I wouldn't feel terrible about it completely. I feel like there's some recency bias after what happened in Philly, after those horrible circumstances, and this is kind of a buy low opportunity, and I'm gonna probably go after him and target him. I just remember I get the early versions of the draft software, which is all live on RotoWire right now. If you want to try some mock drafts, I get the early versions, and I'm doing mocks, just thinking, maybe not with a ton of research when I'm doing these in April, trying to test the product out. I ended up with Carson Wentz on so many teams, and I don't know, maybe it's his name, maybe it's the number 2 overall draft pick, maybe I can think he can get some of that old magic. But with Philly, that receiving core was just hurt, injured over and over and over again. He had a little bit of rigor last year. Zach Ertz was hurt for most of last year. You were going so far down the depth chart just to find guys to throw to, and now he goes to a team, with a pretty strong set of weapons, a new coach, like you said, he's comfortable with, and I think he'll be good. He'll have a good season. I'm going to say that right now. Maybe once I dive more into the QB specific pool, I'll find a handful of guys that like more, but I'll find myself coming away with Wentz as QB2, maybe even QB1 in a lot of drafts for me.
All I hear is just Travis Fulgham. You're just dominating, like you're dunking on him right now. How could you do that to Packers legend and Eagles legend Travis Fulgham? Come on now. No, I agree with you.
Pretty short-lived, right? He had a couple good weeks, and then we probably talked about him and overhyped him on the waiver wire. And then I don't know what is.
I didn't rank him among 350 players
No,
which I thought
after
was
his
kind of
week 9 bye,
so.
he never had more than 5 PPR points, Travis Fulgham. So I think I'm gonna leave that and have that make my point here.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm a little less optimistic than you. You talk about stock up, stock down. I feel like your major stock up, and by default, yes, because Carson Wentz was a bottom 3-4 quarterback in the NFL all of last season and for parts of the prior season too. So yeah, by default, he's going to be a little bit higher. I don't know. QB 17. You look at the QBs around that range, at least from NFFC purposes. You have Daniel Jones a little below that, Tua Tagovailoa below that, Ben Roethlisberger, Justin Fields. Yeah, I'll take Carson Wentz over all those guys, but Baker Mayfield, Kirk Cousins, Trevor Lawrence, Matt Ryan, I love all 4 of those. Well, maybe not Cousins, but I love at least 3 of those exponentially more than Carson Wentz. And it's probably a situation where if I'm in a normal standard league, which would generally amount to 2 quarterbacks, I'm going to have at least 2 of those first 16 guys mentioned, where I will never need to go to Carson Wentz, nor will I have any desire to kind of wait and plan my roster accordingly.
Yeah. Just looking Wentz at the rankings. Yeah, looking at the rankings right now, I think I'd put Wentz above Cousins, Ryan, and Lawrence, but below Mayfield if I was doing it personally. Just kind of a first glance look.
Below Mayfield, interesting. With the Odell Beckham reemergence, I think Baker Mayfield.
I think the Browns are going to be. No, I mean, like, Wentz is, out of all those guys you said, Wentz is the only guy that I put, or Mayfield's the only guy I put above him, is what I'm trying to say.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh,
okay.
All right, interesting. Well, let's move on. A couple of these, I don't want to say lesser, because that's a disrespect to Ryan Fitzpatrick, who likely is going to be the starter for your Washington football team. He is at ADP QB 25 range right now, and I think that's probably underselling. For me, that's a pretty high stock up. I think he could do better than that. Now, I've been doing a lot of best ball drafts, as I know many people have in the industry. There's few legitimate redraft leagues that are happening right now. The Scott Fish Bowl. I know we've talked about these airwaves quite a bit, so that's a little bit different situation. But Fitzpatrick, to me, look at what Washington has done this offseason to retool the pass catchers that they have. Curtis Samuel now signed to Washington. You have Gibson and McKissick. That combo is kind of nice too. Terry McLaurin, his emergence too. I love that quite a bit. And the offensive line has gotten a little bit better for Washington too. I think Ryan Fitzpatrick, should he stay healthy, is one of those sneaky, if you are playing in a 2 QB league, no one wants to draft him, but he will absolutely produce QB2 value for your team throughout the season.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I would say probably stock up here because he wasn't, he's not going to get, I don't think he's going to get pushed by anybody else on Washington as much as he got pushed by Tua and, even replaced at one point here. QB 25, I think that's perfect. QB 2, for all the reasons you said. I mean, they got better with Curtis Samuel. Both their backs, Gibson and McKissick, and Curtis Samuel, if you count him, they're all capable pass catchers. I've seen a ton of Logan Thomas hype all over the place. People are liking him to sneak into the tight end rankings here. We have the Washington offensive line ranked 13, so respectable, above average. And all the things, all in all, I would say stock up for Fitzmagic here. But in the end, QB 25, he's a guy that we're going to talk about in the streamer section of our waiver wire podcast a whole lot. When you've got a QB2 that's not necessarily QB 14 and he's down at QB 25, he becomes expendable when you have to make tough roster decisions here when he goes up against really tough matchups. So he'll be on and off plenty of rosters of mine all year. But of course, like you said, 2 quarterback leagues, he starts to become very relevant.
A couple of smaller additions. Adam Humphries. I'm not sure if anyone's really following Adam Humphries' career. He joined that team. I think he's actually a pretty good slot receiver if they go that route. And I love, from a dynasty perspective, Mario talks a lot about the wide receiver from the Vikings, who I'm going to keep saying his name wrong, so I'm not going to go that direction. But I do think Diami Brown, who was drafted, I think, in the day 2 of it, I think he's going to be a talented guy if they opt to go that route. Yeah, 82nd overall, so the 3rd round pick. I think he could be an interesting option for them at 6'1", a little bit of a speed threat. Not obviously to the extent of Terry McLaurin, but I do think his game really works well with Ryan Fitzpatrick, for whatever that means. And we know Ryan Fitzpatrick isn't going to be a long-term option for them as a starter, but I think this season, as Washington continues to pursue their playoff aspirations, he's going to be a guy to monitor. Let's move over to Sam Darnold, obviously traded from the Jets to the Panthers in that kind of weird swap where then Teddy Bridgewater was sent to the Broncos shortly after. I think this is a big stock up for Darnold as well, if for no other reason than A, he's moving away from Adam Gase, and 2, he's moving away from the stink of the Jets. I think the expectations for Sam Darnold are so low that the bar that he can jump over is pretty minimal, and I think he could be a serviceable guy. I've been of the opinion now for a while, Darnold is a talented player and was put in a really bad situation, much like what I think Zach Wilson is going to be put into right now with the Jets. And I'm happy for him, and I think this is going to be a good deal from a fantasy perspective. Am I going to be drafting him? No, he's currently QB 80 or sorry, QB 28. QB 82 would be kind of drastic. QB 28, but he does have a better line. He has Christian McCaffrey. They still have a couple of those weapons as well for a pass catching perspective for the Panthers. I think Darnold is going to do better than most people would expect, given how bad he stunk it up with the Jets.
Yeah, Darnold kind of leads this tier of guys we can run through relatively quickly because we do want to get to some of the skill positions here. But I agree with you for a lot of the same reasons. You're away from Gase and the Jets. That's an automatic stock up no matter what. QB 28, okay, I don't know. And then, of course, McCaffrey, huge reason. I mean, you can dump off to him. Hopefully he's healthy all year long. So it's a stock up. But in the end, he's another name that's going to come up with our streamers a whole lot during our waiver wire show that's going to happen during the year. So, anyone moves away from the Jets, it's stock up here. I think that's I mean, that's the whole point. This is the conversation. I don't have much to add beyond that. It is what it is, and he'll be a viable streamer at a little bit. I remember last year during our show, I was like, every year I got one quarterback who is actually bad, but I think might be good. And
Mitchell Trubisky.
Yes, yeah, exactly. But that's gone away forever. Darnold was my guy last year, and I'm not ready to give up on that. I think I'm still feeling some of that draft day hype, from way back when, and some of that I don't know luster that had him coming out of college as an early pick. I think he can rebound significantly here.
I'm with you right there. When we talk about stock down, though, I do think it's Jared Goff who was a part of that Matthew Stafford deal, goes to the Lions. The Lions are going to be, if the Texans weren't an NFL franchise, the Lions are the worst franchise in the NFL right now, and I don't think there's any case to be made, in my opinion, that's going to change it otherwise. I think they are the 31st worst team in the league right now, and Goff being the signal caller doesn't help things much to change that. They have next to zero pass catchers. Now, I did rank Tyrell Williams pretty high, way higher than I imagine most of my colleagues are going to when those rankings come live. I think Tyrell Williams is going to actually do really, really well. And Brashad Perriman, who was another acquisition for the Lions too, is going to be slotting over on that other side. But neither of those guys are tremendous assets from like a offensive perspective. You're not really going to have to be worried about either of them. I think Tyrell Williams is going to decimate Kevin King. I can write that down right now.
You've always been a Tyrell Williams guy since your days as the Chargers beat
writer.
So I'll give you that there. But they lose Kenny Gallaudet, they lose Marvin Jones. So not only does he go to a horrible franchise with I would say downgraded offensive line for sure. The weapons that were previously at this franchise have all disappeared. I mean, yes, you've got DeAndre Swift, and maybe we can talk about second-year players in a future show or something like that. I think Swift is going to have just a fine year because he's versatile enough to not necessarily be game flow proof, but I think he'll catch enough passes when they're far behind to do this. But we never really thought that highly of Goff to begin with, and he had that contract which led to this crazy trade and all these pick swaps.
Right.
I mean, he wasn't that great to begin with. He was barely QB2 with the Rams, probably fell into streaming territory. Now he's going to stay undrafted in the vast majority of leagues. He might even stay undrafted in some best ball leagues where the rosters go deeper. That wouldn't surprise me at all because it is a major stock down. I don't have anything else on that.
Yeah. And then 2 backup QBs right now, or at least it seems to be Teddy Bridgewater. Again, I referenced that earlier. Going to be in a pretty tight QB battle with Drew Lock, although if you talk or listen or read any of the comments from the pass catchers from the Broncos, it's a pretty one-sided debate. Like Drew Lock is going to be the starter. They're doing the whole, Teddy Bridgewater can throw a really accurate pass. That like it's all those type of comments where Lock really has the ball spinning out of his hands. He throws it on a rope. It's as blatant disrespect as you could possibly get to the quarterback. Yeah. So Bridgewater, I think.
I mean, we're not even in camp yet, so or barely. We're
Bridgewater
just getting
clear
there,
backup, right? I mean, clear backup to Drew Lock, who Drew Lock is not very good either. And then Andy Dalton, who signed on and was very notoriously QB1 for the Bears, only for them to draft Justin Fields. And I think Fields is going to be light years better. From the Bears' perspective, I'm not sure they're competing for anything other than a wild card spot anyway. So why not give your rookie a chance to compete? And that's where I think Justin Fields, and the majority seem to agree, Justin Fields, again, his ADP is QB 22. in NFFC formats. Deshaun Watson, Derek Carr, Ryan Fitzpatrick after Fields. I think that's pretty aggressive for a guy that had some major lumps at Ohio State. But he's an athlete, and I think an athlete's going to win out over Andy Dalton. That's fair, right?
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. These guys were kind of like, I don't know, the Bridgewater Dalton, I kind of put them in the honorable mentions category, right? I kind of have a few of those guys at the end that we can just kind of tear through because, they're probably not going to be super fantasy relevant at any point this year, either of them, really. Now that I think about it, I'll go ahead and make that statement and feel comfortable about it.
Wow, you're really taking a big leap on this one, Jake. Good job.
Yep. I mean, someone's got to get hurt. That's the only way. You don't really bet on injuries. That's just saying it like it is here.
Yeah, I agree with you. Before we move over to the running back portion of the transaction spot, let's go ahead and get a word from our sponsors, the Sports Gambling Podcast Network. So the Sports Gambling Podcast Network is your home for the most entertaining sports gambling content. Sean Green and Ryan Kramer host the flagship sports gambling podcast, getting you ready to make some money in the NFL, where they picked every game against the spread since 2011. SGPN has also covered you with the College Football Experience, and the College Football Experience is a preview episode dedicated to every one of the 130 college football teams. SGPN also covers fantasy football, MLB, golf, MMA, NHL, NBA, and more. If you can bet on it, they cover it. If the free picks and podcasts weren't enough, they're also giving out a free shot to win $100,000 during NFL Week 1. That's right, a free roll for a chance to win $100,000 exclusively on their new SGPN app. Download the SGPN app in the App Store or Google Play Store for tons of free picks, free podcasts, and free prizes. Remember, SGPN doesn't sell picks, they make them. All right, let's move over to the running backs here. It was a little bit less, right? We talked about quarterbacks having kind of a big transaction off season. Running backs, I thought, got destroyed. I mean, Mike Davis is one of the top guys right now. His ADP among running backs is 29 at the moment, 72 overall. That was close to where I had. I think I had Davis a little bit lower. But he's about the only guy that seems to be a legitimate starter of anyone that's signed this offseason. He moved from the Panthers, obviously, to the Falcons, staying in the NFC South. A 2-year, $5.5 million commitment more or less screams starter running back money, at least at this juncture, at this point in the NFL season, like where we are right now. But I'm not really enthused by him. And obviously they also signed Cordarrelle Patterson too. I think to be more of a pass catcher. I think the Falcons offense is going to be kind of weird overall, just in general.
I'm a little bit indifferent on this one. I mean, 72 overall ADP, I don't know, you can maybe pay it for RB3. It's going to be one of those take it or leave it things where I'm not reaching to go get him, but if he falls enough, I'm fine getting him. He pretty much he saved one of my seasons when McCaffrey went down last year. He was such a good pass catcher out of the backfield, and Matt Ryan has had guys in the past that he's gone to out of the backfield that can make plays. I mean, why not Mike Davis at 28 years old? I think he still has something left. I'm not worried about the competition. You alluded to Cordarrelle Patterson, and then after that on the depth chart, we've got Quadre Allison, who is, I probably butchered that name, but 5th-round draft pick in 2019, has 23 career rushing attempts, only 11 career games. So just the sheer lack of competition here is what makes me think that the volume's going to be there. Could he get 1,000 snaps? Who knows? Maybe. And then of course, like you said, the Atlanta offense loses a big weapon in Julio Jones, kind of preview for the receiver section of our show where we'll go over that. But, the way Matt Ryan has thrown running backs in the past, I think he's a pretty safe bet to get, 40, 50 catches. And 1,000 yards will be tough because I think they're going to be a team that trails quite a bit over the course of the season. But I can very much see why out of all the running backs that moved and changed teams, he's going to be the highest drafted fantasy guy.
Yeah, and I mean, he's kind of got a guaranteed workload at the moment. We have him projected for somewhere in the range of like 379 receiving yards, which is only 6 more than what he got with the Panthers. So I would imagine the guys that do the rankings think he's going to be splitting time. And I think there's a fair question to be made about that. We talked about all the guys that the Rams could go ahead and acquire. I think the same thing could be said for the Falcons. Now, they are financially cash-strapped. That's why they ended up moving Julio Jones. We think for the most part they're tanking, although why do they keep Matt Ryan?
Yeah.
That's a different question altogether.
Yeah, well, that's my thing. Like, how much are they going to give up? Are they really going to try to go in this year? Maybe if they get a good early start, but
how many assets do you really want to invest? Like a James Robinson, you don't want to go ahead and trade for him. And I think even a Melvin Gordon might acquire a higher pick than what the Falcons could do. But there are some names out in the free agency wire, and I think especially on cutdown day, like a Sonny Michel perhaps, that really fits the mold, I think, for a guy that can at least do similar stuff to Mike Davis. So people are drafting him again higher than they might want to, thinking, I have a starting running back for the Falcons. They might be a bad team, but at least going to get a lot of playing time. I think slow your roll a little bit on that. Let's see how training camp progresses. And we might get more information for how much the Falcons really do like Mike Davis, because I don't know if we have that kind of locked down at the moment. So we're cool with moving to Kenyon Drake?
Yeah, let's go ahead and keep her moving.
Okay, so Kenyon Drake obviously moving from the Cardinals to the Raiders, running back 34 right now. Obvious backup behind Josh Jacobs. But from what I've seen, and Mario and John have talked about this plenty on the Thursday edition of the podcast, it's really hindered Josh Jacobs' ADP value. And I think people are overestimating what Kenyon Drake is going to do just because he got a relatively ginormous contract. That's more because Gruden and Mayock are just stupid, and not so much that they have any idea that Drake is like this all-star caliber guy.
Yeah.
Yes,
2
if Josh
years, $11 million
for
Drake when Davis got $2 and $5.5 million. So I know it's all about guaranteed money in the NFL, but on the surface, I wouldn't be surprised if he's a cap casualty next season somehow.
I wouldn't either. And it goes back to your point, or I guess the point I was making, where Drake just a little bit of an overpay, but I think we're drafting based on that overpay, and that's the wrong call. Maybe if Jacobs goes down, Kenyon Drake can do more of like the 3-down work capabilities, but to me, he's the pass catcher of that group, which really hurts Jalen Ricard, who is like, I think has fallen completely out of the favor now with the Raiders altogether, and could be an option for the Rams if they really wanted to go ahead and get a pass catcher. I don't know. What's your read on Kenyon Drake right now? Are you at all interested in him as a kind of a high-end backup, like an Alexander Madison type?
Yeah, I would. I guess you can maybe, when you say Alexander Madison, I guess I'd rather have Drake here, but it's closer than one would think. I mean, he was ran out of town in Miami, right? And then he goes to Arizona for an apparent, revitalization, but he was really a huge boomer bust player in Arizona. I mean, he had games at 28 and 24 PPR points, but he had his fair share of single digit PPR points over there as well. And I feel like the way that the Raiders want to run their offense is going to be a lot of power run with Josh Jacobs. Now, has Jacobs had his fair share of injuries over his short time in the league? Yeah, of course he has, and you can maybe see a Drake game or two, but I don't know if I don't know if I could see using a 6th, 7th round pick on somebody like Drake, because I just don't think that he's going to be. I mean, I almost put him in a similar vein as like Latavius Murray maybe last year or something like that. I just don't get that excited about him, because I do think Jacobs he's the younger, he's the better player, and as long as Jacobs can manage the workload they give him, that just doesn't leave a whole lot left for Drake.
Yeah, I think you have to enter with an expectation of, I'm drafting a backup that could be great, right? Everyone does this with Tony Pollard. That may or may not be a strategy you want to do. I don't really care. Fine. Like, okay, I'll get a backup like Tony Pollard or Alexander Madison. I think Kenyon Drake fits into that mold too. And he has a bit more pedigree, which makes people, I think, overdraft him. But if you're able to get him as a top-end backup, fine. If you're drafting him like, he's going to be a really good complement to Josh Jacobs, and it could be like a AFC West version of what the Browns do with Chubb and Hunt, well, then you're all sorts of wrong, and I want to play in your league because I'm going to dominate. Like that's not the right mentality that you need to be having with Kenyon Drake, despite what they paid for him. So it seems like we're both in the same wavelength with him. Stock down, obviously, whereas Mike Davis, pretty high stock up. I think stock down for Kenyon Drake.
The only running back we're going to talk about that has stock up is Davis, really, because if you're changing teams in your late 20s as a running back, you're almost always going from a workhorse to a situation where you're going to have to split time at best, and you're going to see that theme throughout our running back section here.
That's fair. I was actually going to say I'm a little bit curious to hear your opinion on the Philip Lindsay move. Obviously, Philip Lindsay moved changed teams from the Broncos to the Texans. Texans also acquired Mark Ingram as well in the offseason, although nobody cares about that, and nor should they.
Our last Mark Ingram note says he has at least a slight chance to be on the wrong side of the roster bubble. I mean, a veteran
only a
like
slight
him,
chance. There's no reason Mark Ingram should be in a team. They literally signed Mark Ingram just to be the rah-rah veteran guy to change that leadership around, and that's fine. I mean, again, the Lions are the second worst team because the Texans are an NFL franchise, although barely. That's not the point, though. Philip Lindsay, I think, actually could be a decent high-end backup because we know David Johnson has his injury concerns as well. Now, what's going to happen with Deshaun Watson in his situation, I think, complicates everything with the Texans offense, and that's where I just don't want to really get into it too much. But if we have some understanding or know what's going to go down, then I think we can make an accurate guess on Philip Lindsay's status. So to me, that's the bigger deal. That I think Philip Lindsay, I like him as a backup because I think David Johnson obviously is injury prone. We all think that at this point in his career. But we need to have David Johnson out of the picture for Philip Lindsay to be a possible 800, 900-yard rushing guy like he was with the Broncos.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much exactly it here. We have Johnson projected for 725 yards right now. I see that maybe a little bit on the conservative end, but then at the same time, he only played 12 games last year, 13 games the year before, 2 seasons before that, was his big injury season here, and he's 29 years old. He's getting to be pretty close to over the hill from running back years. So I don't mind the Philip Lindsay ADP price, but if you're gonna buy, sell, or hold, it's almost a hold for me because it's really not all that different from what he was doing, in Denver with Melvin Gordon here. Because Gordon, I mean, he had his injuries, but when he was healthy, he was still really the guy. And Lindsay was a secondary option for a lot of that, except those for those slight runs here. He can go on a 2-3 game run at any point during the season. But it's a tough guy to rely on week in and week out, which is, I guess, what you're getting to when you get to the tier of, ADP 150. So fair enough, but that's an even hold, if anything, for me. I'm not going out of my way to get him. Chances are at around 150 in a draft, I'm going to start taking chances on rookies that might overtake or win a job.
Yeah, I think so. And at least the way I've constructed rosters from a best ball perspective thus far, I'm getting the running backs out of the way early, so I don't have to dabble in this situation too much. I think there's a lot of wide receivers late that you can make a case, especially rookie guys or second-year players that can make a jump or a leap. And it's hard to say, yeah, Philip Lindsay for sure is going to make a leap because you're dependent on X player getting hurt or anything else like that. And that's too often the prevailing issue with the running backs, at least from what I've seen. This is no different than it has been in past years. But keep that in mind when you're having different draft strategies entering the season. This is kind of the situation we're looking at where Philip Lindsay is your running back 51. And you need to have more than 50 running backs drafted throughout a given time because most teams are having 5, 6, 7 running backs in their roster if you're playing in a 12-team format. So it's going to be an interesting one to monitor. And another name that kind of fits into that mold, I think, is James Conner, who may not be still dealing with that toe injury that he had with the Steelers. He moves over to the Cardinals and kind of curtailed Edmonds' value as well too, which was kind of a double-edged sword. So Conner now becomes the obvious guy, red zone situation player, guy that's going to get you 2 yards and not much else, right? The Ryan Grants of the running backs out there. And I think Chase Edmonds becomes more the pass catcher role, which, to be fair, he flourished with at times with Kenyon Drake last season. So are you at all excited about James Conner's prospects? He's running back 40 right now. So a little bit earlier than Philip Lindsay by a round or two. And I'm not quite sure I see the difference in value to what the drafters do.
So when I was making the outline here, I kind of I skimmed the depth charts to see who all changed, to try to make sure I didn't miss anyone. And then I kind of wrote them down in order of how impactful I thought they were. And I actually had Lindsay ahead of Conner. And then when I look back and added the ADP numbers in later to the show notes here, I was surprised to see that Conner was getting drafted significantly higher. You have a timeshare at best with a guy who is injured. So, yeah, maybe best case scenario, he comes in and can get some goal line carries, and good for him. But I don't see him catching a ton of passes. I'm a little bit worried about the injury. He has had a handful of injuries here. And, I mean, I know he's got Kyler Murray. It would be an upgrade at quarterback, but I'm not necessarily sure the offense is that much of an upgrade. I mean, and then his last couple of years, he just 116 carries for 464 yards, 169 carries, 721 yards, has never played a full 16 games in his career here, has never even played a full 15 games in his career. So I was less excited about that here, and I think of him in a similar view as Lindsay. So I guess based on that, I'm probably not going to be taking him at his price of 108 overall. That seems like quite a bit for me.
I like him in the best ball format where you can get the possible 2 touchdown game or the 4 catches for 40 yards on top of 6 carries, or I guess 16 carries for 60, right? Like a guaranteed 12 to 15 points. But I don't think you're going to know if you're starting in a redraft league when those times are going to occur. And I don't think if Edmonds were to get hurt, you're going to be like, all right, I can guarantee plug Conner into my lineup. I don't think it works that way with what we've seen in Conner the past 2 years. Maybe if he's more healthy, I don't know. The Phoenix Suns have a great rehabilitation from an injury perspective, maybe the Cardinals can get some of those guys and make Connor this all-world stud. I have
nobody
no idea.
Giannis, though. If you're going to mention the Suns, we got to mention Giannis coming back from just completely blowing out his knee into 20 pieces, according to every Twitter doctor, to throwing down and getting game winners here.
I have Game 6 in the brain, and I cannot help it. I know you do too. Bucks have a chance to end that 50-year championship drought. So I'm just thinking about that. But I have no idea. If you could tell me Connor is completely healthy, can be that guy that we saw from the Steelers, 2 years ago now, I'm a little bit more interested in him as a 3-down back and would make sense for his ADP. But at this current price, I would almost rather have Lindsay, much like you. So let's move over to the honorable mention guys that you had. Jamal Williams moving from the Packers to the Lions. He's running back 44 right now, which feels incredibly aggressive to me for what I know Jamal Williams to be as a player. And then there's also Malcolm Brown, who I think actually has a reasonable chance to do and be a difference maker for the Dolphins. He's running back 76. I think there's a drastic difference between what people perceive Jamal Williams to be from a talent perspective. And we saw it in that Texans game last year when Aaron Jones was gone. I don't think Jamal Williams is by any stretch of the imagination a 3-down guy, can be explosive in any way. He's an energy guy. I love the hype that he gives, and for a Lions team that's trying not to be the worst in the NFL, great to have those leadership dudes around. But he does not matter for me at all from fantasy. And I think if the Lions are smart and want to win games, DeAndre Swift is touching the ball a ton more than Williams.
Yeah, to me, he's nothing more than like a secondary option if you have Swift, and you got to get your guy later on to back him up. We're not allowed to say the H word anymore. Let's see here, but yeah, I was surprised to see him that high in ADP. The team's bad. The team's terrible. The offensive line is much worse. You said one of the worst teams in the league, and I don't know. He could be one bad concussion away from another long absence.
True.
Because we saw him we saw that happen to him in Green Bay here. So. To me, he's a guy you pick up when you're on a really bad bye week situation and you need to get like 4 or 5 points in your flex just to have someone in there. That's how I think of him. And obviously that's way far off from where his ADP is at. So, it's going to be a fade for me, at least early on.
And I had teased Malcolm Brown as well, too. What's your thoughts on him real quick?
I still like Gaskin to win that job. So, again, I put him, I put him closer to the Lindsay Connor tier than most people do, but not crazy excited about him.
That's fair. I'm right there with you. I think Malcolm Brown, when you're drafting in the best ball formats, you can get him like rounds 20 and later, and that makes sense to me because if Gaskin were to get hurt, I think he's the next guy up. I don't know how valuable that role is with Tua and the rest of the Dolphins. But I think that's what probably happens, even though Salvin Ahmed did great things last year in that capacity. So fine, I'm willing to take that risk, much in the same way that I would do with like Samaje Perine with the Bengals. But nobody's ever excited to draft Samaje Perine, and I think the same could be said for Malcolm Brown too with the Dolphins. So let's move over to the pass catchers. We've spent plenty of time on the Rams and the quarterbacks and everything else. There's actually some bigger names that happened here. But before we do that, let's get a word from our sponsors, Dynasty Owner. Experience the fun of fantasy football and the strategy of running an NFL franchise at dynastyowner.com. Dynasty Owner unites the fun and excitement of fantasy football with the skill and strategy of the front office and the business side of owning an NFL franchise. Build a roster of NFL players using their real-world contracts and salaries while staying under the salary cap and compete weekly against other teams in your league as you score points based on the player's real-world performance. Visit dynastyowner.com today to sign up. I'm actually in the Dynasty Owner League right now. We actually, myself and Jerry Donabedian, are in the league together, like the experts league of it. It's been fun so far. I actually won the consolation round, which was pretty huge for off-season purposes, and we had our Dynasty League draft too. It prioritizes the quarterbacks a little bit more than you'd think, the rookie quarterbacks, because you don't want to have a $30 million Matthew Stafford taking up 1/6 of your budget. So you get those rookie quarterbacks and ends up being relatively value. I hate Mac Jones, but I end up having to draft him in the late first round. So do with that what you will with the Dynasty Owner stuff, but proud sponsors of them and helping out our podcast stuff. So let's move over to those pass catchers. We mentioned Julio Jones earlier in the podcast. He was traded to the Titans. Falcons cash strapped, moved him over. Tannehill, obviously, I think gets the bigger bump with Julio Jones around. But A.J. Brown, you have A.J. Brown, Derrick Henry, and I think Anthony Firkser is going to be a pretty good player too. But Julio Jones kind of steps into a massive role because they don't have a lot of weapons, especially after losing both Adam Humphries and Corey Davis. So What's your read on Julio Jones? The market has him at wide receiver 17, ADP 45 at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing crazy about thinking that Julio Jones and A.J. Brown cannot succeed together. Julio Jones, I mean, even Ridley has recently, he seems to always kind of have that sidekick, two guys that are very good. I like the buy low here, and I feel in my gut it's something similar to last year when we did that first-year dynasty draft, and people were discounting Stephon Diggs after moving to the Bills, and because John Brown was there and all of that. It feels a little bit similar to me there, and for that reason, I think I'm going to get a little Julio this year. When I wasn't getting Julio when he was wide receiver 5, wide receiver 6. But how much different are we really? How much different of a player are we getting at wide receiver 17? Remember, they lost Corey Davis here, so it's an easy one to punch. And I don't think Tannehill's really that much worse than Matt Ryan, if at all. And then the Titans have a bottom half defense. I would presume they were 4th worst last year in yards allowed per game. So they will, of course, when they're ahead, Henry's going to run the ball a ton. And in the fourth quarter, even when it's close, Henry's going to run the ball a ton. But I think there's going to be plenty of targets to go around. So really, the fact that it's probably a run-first offense and that A.J. Brown is probably number one hurts him a little bit. But I don't know. I went into last year basically thinking Ridley was number one and Jones was number two. And, Jones still showed signs. He was productive fantasy-wise. And now I think the price is finally right where I'll get a little bit.
Not a lot of great history when it comes to 32-plus-year-old wide receivers, especially coming off the injury issues that Julio Jones had, missing 7 games last year. I don't know if that changes with the Titans. Obviously, that offense revolves around Derrick Henry. But anything that comes with Derrick Henry means play action. And I think A.J. Brown gets to benefit from that. And Julio Jones does too. I think this helps Brown. Mm-hmm. This helps Brown more as the intermediate threat. I think almost Brown could take the Corey Davis role and Julio Jones go deep. But Tannehill throws a pretty good deep ball, so that still works out just fine for me. Mm-hmm. And I agree with you. You might be buying low a little bit right now with Julio Jones. I guess I like a lot of other wide receivers around that range. Not to say I wouldn't draft Julio Jones. I just like other guys that end up being there. But it might be one of those situations where I play enough leagues, and I do, that you just want to diversify your shares of players, and I think Julio Jones could be that perfect guy. So
yeah, and not that I'm worried about A.J. Brown's knees necessarily, but he did have surgery on both his knees in January, so there's that, and I don't know if that affects Jones too much, but I'm just kind of throwing that out there. And then lastly, if you're the opposing defense, who are you going to double cover? Between those two, you try to single cover Julio, I'm sure, with your second guy, and there's going to be opportunities to take advantage there.
Agreed. Let's go to Kenny Gallaudet. I think one of the bigger stock down guys that you could possibly find from major offseason moves. So he goes from Matthew Stafford, pretty good quarterback, to Daniel Jones, who is not a good quarterback despite what Chris Liss might say. You have an offense that was entirely dependent on him in Detroit to a Giants offense that has a lot of pass catchers and even added more in the realms of Kadarius Toney and then also Kyle Rudolph too. And then you have Saquon Barkley back that should be relatively healthy. I think this is an awful spot for him. He got paid, which is great for him. Like Kenny Gallaudet, the person, awesome work. From fantasy perspective, I love him quite a bit. And I don't know where he really fits into this. And I think especially joining a new team, one that's kind of in a weird spot with their quarterback, this is not good news for his fantasy prospects.
Yeah, all the way down to wide receiver 25. So I think the market's reacted almost appropriately to this from someone who was basically a consensus top 10 guy last year, or at least at the edge of that. The receiver pool's, it's pretty loaded, of course. But no, I agree with everything you said. Stafford to Jones, I would say, is a downgrade, and it's not super close there. There's plenty of other competition out there, and I think I don't really have much else to say on that. Pretty clear downgrade for Gallaudet fantasy-wise.
Will Fuller is another name that I think a lot of people are people will say he's a sleeper, but he's been talked about so much to me that he's not a sleeper anymore. I think we're all pretty aware of what Will Fuller could do in this offense, and a lot depends on Tua Tagovailoa and what he does and his development from year 1 to year 2, because he was not a good quarterback whatsoever in his rookie season, and I'm not sure he's going to make that step. But the Dolphins have really invested a lot in making Tua a better quarterback, Will Fuller being an example, Jalen Waddle being the other. I really like Jalen Waddle, and I think that Alabama connection cannot be overstated enough. But Will Fuller is a talented wide receiver in his own right. We saw, I know he had the PED suspension, so maybe we could take a little bit less from his numbers, but he's able to be a little bit more healthy and could do everything, whether it be the deep threat, underneath route, across the middle. that was the first emergence of Will Fuller as the wide receiver for the Texans last season. I think a lot of people thought he could be when he was drafted out of Notre Dame. Where are you with his move to Miami?
Yeah, I'm a little terrified going from Watson to a second-year quarterback that largely unknown. I mean, maybe Tua can. I mean, really, there's only up to go from here, right? And he could possibly get it together, but I'd be very wary to pay a top 100 pick on someone like Fuller. Like, he's always been a best ball guy, right? You have him in your lineups for his really good weeks. Then, you know, if you can stomach his 30-point weeks, you better be able to stomach his 6-point weeks or 0-point weeks even.
Right.
And he will miss the first game of the year too. I'll note that as well. So no, I'm not crazy high on that, and I think it's a definitely stock down now. He's betting on himself with that 1-year deal. He'll be plenty motivated, and you know, who knows? Maybe the Dolphins will win a few more games than I was expecting. I mean, they were almost 500 last year, so I guess there are some pieces there, but I don't know. For the most part, it's going to be a stock down for me.
Would you rather have Curtis Samuel, who moved from Carolina to Washington? Samuel is wide receiver 39. Will Fuller is wide receiver 38. Like, that's a kind of an interesting debate. Now, Samuel missed all of minicamp due to a groin injury that was dated back to June. So, like, that's a little bit troubling to me, although we haven't heard much of an update if he's healthy for training camp or not. I think the Fitzpatrick addition will help things for Curtis Samuel not hurt, from Teddy Bridgewater in Carolina to Ryan Fitzpatrick now in Washington. I think I'm talking myself into Curtis Samuel higher than Will Fuller right now. I guess I have to check where I have my rankings, but where do you have him?
Yeah, you know, I think I'd go Samuel over Fuller too, but I think it's mostly because of the kind of teams I like to draft and the kind of fantasy football player that I am. I would rather take 9 to 11 PPR points from Curtis Samuel a week than have to deal with the variance that is Will Fuller that you'll have to deal with. And of course, hopefully Samuel's ready for week 1. He's used, I don't know if they'll use him the same way in Washington, because they have they have a solid and deep running back group, especially in terms of pass catchers. So I don't know if we'll get the same amount of carries, but just because we've seen it before, we've seen his versatility. We can see him on screen passes, we can see him on short routes, and we can see him, maybe break through, find the seam every once in a while. So I would think I like the touches and consistency of Samuel, maybe a little bit more, but again, it's a real tight one because, their ADPs, they're right next to each other, 38, 39.
Yeah, actually, I have Samuel pretty highly ranked in mine. So it's Gallaudet. It's Jerry Jeudy, Samuel, Robert Woods, Cortland Sutton, Mike Williams, and Mike Gallup, all within like 7 spots of each other. I think each one of those guys makes a lot of sense, but I like Samuel more than just about all of them. I guess in hindsight, maybe I'll bump up Robert Woods a little bit more now with the news of Cam Akers being done, because I think the offense, like you mentioned,
sleeps on Woods every year anyway. He's a great fantasy player to have.
Right. Well, I just think he's going to be used a little bit more in that capacity. Like, I can see a more defined role now that Cam Akers is out. But it just goes to show, I think Curtis Samuel is going to be a fantastic option this year. And I really, really like his move to Ryan Fitzpatrick as the quarterback. So we'll go to 2 other names. I guess a couple more. Corey Davis.
We can do them quick. There are a bunch of wide receivers that change teams. We can just do quick upgrade, downgrade with a sentence maybe.
Yeah, Corey Davis, Titans, obviously not going to the Jets. I think it's a massive downgrade because the Jets have a lot of guys. And Zach Wilson, who I'm not completely sure is a great quarterback, and are in a completely defunct situation, which is the Jets right now. So I don't know. Am I over-exaggerating this?
No, I mean, I've always believed in Corey Davis as an athlete since I watched him play the Badgers in the Western Michigan bowl game all those years ago. But anybody going to the Jets from anywhere is just a downgrade as is. You have a complete wild card at quarterback. Even if he is the number 1 guy, I don't like the situation, so it's a downgrade for me.
Nelson Agholor moving for the Raiders to the Patriots, one of the major offseason additions the Patriots made pretty early on. Obviously, it became apparent they overpaid for Agholor and Kendrick Bourne. But money being what it is, I think Agholor is now like the top option for the Patriots, pushing out Jacoby Meyer, who is a great free agent pickup that we mentioned multiple occasions last year. I don't know. Their market has them at wide receiver 62. From the leagues that I've done, I think that's actually conservative. I've seen him drafted way higher. I've had our very own NFL editor, Mike Doria, on numerous occasions try to trade for Nelson Agholor and give me like absolute crap for him. I don't devalue Agholor to that extent, but I really don't think Cam Newton is a NFL quarterback at this juncture of his career. And I think that hurts just about every pass catcher in New England at the moment.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with you too. too, and I think this might be one of our spicier ones because a lot of people would say upgrade for Aguilar given where he is on the depth chart, but I'm gonna call this one a downgrade as well. He could fly in under the radar with Vegas, right? And he's not necessarily going to be able to do that anymore with what the Patriots paid him. Myers and Bourne are still around. The run game's still there. James White gets targets, and the tight end combo. We'll talk about them. I don't want to spoil the finale, I guess, but the tight end combo is going to get targets too. So but like you said, we're in agreement here. The biggest down factor there is Cam Newton. Can he really be an NFL quarterback that's going to throw for, even 3,500 yards anymore? And I'm not quite sure that's the case.
Sliding into that Aguilar spot is John Brown, who moves over from the Bills to the Raiders. You listed him as a downgrade. I actually think John Brown is going to do relatively well. Now, we have to see if he's healthy or not, but it's Henry Ruggs, and then it's Brian Edwards. But then it's John Brown. I mean, that's kind of it. And Darren Waller, of course, from the pass catchers. I think Brown kind of seamlessly fits into that Aguilar role, which could be 80 catches and close to 1,000 yards. And I'll gladly take that as wide receiver 67.
Yeah, I just feel like Ruggs is their deep guy here, and
Aguilar wasn't the deep guy last year, and he ended up being a pretty solid fantasy guy.
Yeah, no, fair enough. I feel like Ruggs just does similar things to Brown, and he does them a little bit better here. And I don't know how many deep shots they're actually going to take to begin with, and I feel like most of those have to go to Ruggs. They got Ruggs; he's number one. Waller's definitely number two when it comes to the pass catchers there. And then there's some uncertainty here after he only played 9 games last year, and he's bounced around the league a lot. A lot of organizations were ready to let him go. You said 31 years old with the history of those guys changing teams here. I just think because of his career trajectory and the circumstances and other people on the depth chart around him that it is still a slight downgrade. And at 186, that's borderline undrafted in some 12-team leagues.
That's fair. 2 other guys to mention, Sammy Watkins moving from the Chiefs to the Ravens. Watkins is listed at wide receiver 79 right now. I think I'm not even ever touching him. I know there's those 30 round best balls, and I've done a few. And I'm never thinking, man, I can't wait to get Sammy Watkins in round 24. Maybe I need to be changing my course of action better than that. But I think maybe he's not done. I think he's got to go to the right situation. But the right situation is not Baltimore, in my opinion. What about you?
Yeah, I think I kept him in our 16-team, 20-man roster league. Just to see what happens, and he'll be one of my first roster casualties if not. But that's only because the 6th round of the rookie free agent or 7th round of the rookie free agent draft, there's absolutely nothing out there anyway. So he's around there, but I put question marks. I don't really know. You don't want to be the second option on a team that wants nothing to do with passing.
Right. And then my boy, Tyrell Williams. I think what's going to end up happening is you are going to hear Tyrell Williams mentioned more on these airwaves than you have ever mentioned or heard at any point in Tyrell Williams' entire career. I think he's going to be great. I really do. I think he could do a lot of stuff. He's not just the deep ball guy, but if the Lions do want to do deep ball stuff, you're throwing it to Perriman, not Williams. And while I think DeAndre Swift and TJ Hawkinson will get a lot of targets, there's got to be a third option. Give me Tyrell Williams. I have him ranked in like the 170, 180 range, and he's currently being drafted in the ADP of 260 and wide receiver 85.
Yeah. I got some Badger bias. I think the Quintez Cephas show might start pretty soon here. We'll see. But I'll give you this, Joe. I will say upgrade just because their whole wide receiving core, it got flushed out this offseason. And there's some names there. There's some names, I'll give you that. But beyond that, there's not much else. So I don't like much about the circumstances, but he seems to be the guy number 1 on the depth chart. So upgrade based on that alone.
Let's talk about the two quarterbacks, the 2 tight ends that the Patriots acquired, Hunter Henry and Jonnu Smith. We've talked about, a lot of people have talked about Hunter Henry as the guy because he got more money. But Mario pointed out on Twitter today that Jonnu's contract is the 3rd most guaranteed money among tight ends. I think Jonnu Smith is going to be more of the pass catcher, whereas Hunter Henry is the blocker. Henry can do both. But I think Jonnu Smith is the one that I'll be drafting as tight end 16 as opposed to Henry at tight end 14. Although I think that's kind of changed. I think the market has slowly pushed more to Jonnu Smith. There was something about the schedule, though, that I wanted to mention with the Patriots, that theoretically the Jonnu Smith and the Patriots are going to be like their bye week is right when you would be anticipating the fantasy playoffs would start in your league because now the week 18 change has made things. So keep that in mind. You're not drafting Jonnu Smith at tight end 16 to be your number 1 starter, but those bye weeks are going to have to be something you're bouncing around with, and that's one of those guys that you have to at least monitor.
Yeah, I mean, if we say if I'm going to stand on that Aguilar is a downgrade hill because of the situation here, the Cam Newton quarterback situation, I guess I have to say downgrade for these guys, and ADP is certainly reflecting that. But at the same time, if I absolutely punt tight ends and have to wait until 126, 134 to grab a guy, I wouldn't be devastated if I came out with one of these guys, just because I'm believers in their ability. I mean, Hunter Henry had to deal with, Tyrod Taylor and then a rookie quarterback. He's had to deal with all sorts of quarterbacks over the course of his career. Jonnu Smith.
That's not a bad thing. Justin Herbert was amazing. This is the Chargers guy talking to.
Okay, fair enough. And then Jonnu Smith, can be a good red zone guy. So again, once you're in the tight end 14 to 16 range, to get anybody borderline reliable is there, and at least both of these guys have been top 6 or 7 tight ends in the past, so it's there. I don't feel great about it, but I'll have some shares, I guess. I'm as neutral as it can be on these guys. It's definitely downgrade if we talk from last year or from several years ago. I got to say downgrade here, but at their price right now, it's kind of take it or leave it. I wouldn't be scared off by these guys at their price. I'd do it. I'd feel okay about it, and we just move on.
Yeah, I'm taking Anthony Ferkser now, the starting tight end for the Titans, over both of those guys. I might even take Adam Troutman, possibly a starter for the Saints, if you told me Jameis Winston's going to be the quarterback. Although I think reports are that it might not be Jameis Winston at quarterback, which then I'm all out on the Saints altogether. But after that, I'd consider Jonnu Smith would be the first over Hunter Henry for me. But then there's also like a guy like Jared Cook, who's now filling in the role of starting tight end for the Chargers. I think Cook is going to be a guy that gets drafted a little bit higher as we progress throughout the season, but he's not going to be anyone that gets more than 600, 700 yards. I think the bigger bump with Henry gone is going to be more Mike Williams and maybe more Tyron Johnson if he ends up beating out Jalen Guyton. I think he should. Mm-hmm. That offense is going to look a lot different for the Chargers, and I don't think Cook really makes much of a factor, but he's one of those other guys. And then there's also Kyle Rudolph, who went from the Vikings to the Giants. The Giants also signed Kelvin Benjamin, who is mysteriously projected for like 30 catches.
His comeback. I think he's coming back as a tight end, right?
Yeah, I think Liss is sipping the Giants Kool-Aid with that one a little bit, because I don't think Benjamin makes the roster, much less gets 30 catches this season. But hey, good for him. Rudolph, I think, could be interesting if the Giants move Evan Ingram, and there's been a lot of talk about that happening this offseason. But even still, he's being drafted outside the top 500. That feels about right to me. You're playing in a really deep league if you're ever considering Kyle Rudolph to be in your starting lineup.
Yeah, I mean, he's just a waiver wire ad for when Evan Ingram inevitably gets injured, right? I mean, that's what it is at this point. And Ingram, really, it's affected Ingram's ADP more than anything. He's all the way down at 15. So, yeah.
Well, that does it for us. Our first edition of the Tuesday podcast, maybe a little bit longer. But again, we're trying to get you guys, the listeners, ready and prepared for the NFL season. We're going to continue to do that. We've talked strategy in past years, maybe gone over guys that we like or dislike more than others. Just try to give you a different element than all the other great hosts and shows that happen throughout the year. But we are now going to be set. RotoWire is having podcasts for NFL every single day up until it feels like the playoffs, like the first round of playoffs, even later than that. We've got the DFS guys on Fridays. They're going to be coming back, giving you some strategy talk. Mario and John have been with you every Thursday doing great work. And then Jeff and his roulette of guests is always one of my favorite things to do too on Wednesdays. And then you have Chris and Jeff too on Monday as well. That's a different cup of tea that you can be excited about too. So yeah, it was great to do this, Jake, and I'm happy to do this for the rest of the year. What?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can't go wrong with any of those guys. Thank you to the handful of viewers stuck around with our mugs for the last hour, and hopefully this is helpful. And we're always down to hear show ideas. If you want to hear something that might be helpful for a Draft Kids show, anything like that, hit us both up on Twitter. He's JB's Fantasy Sports. I'm Roto Jake. I think it should be on the broadcast, but either way, I don't know. We're learning. This is week 1 of the video, and I'm happy to do it with you, Joe.
Yeah, me too. And of course, make sure to rate and review the podcast if you can. We have the Draft Kit app out as well right now. You can get that by going to rotowire.com/try. 10 days free trial. You can see all that stuff, some of our software as well included in that. It's below on the video too if you're watching on YouTube right now. And you'll have to be mindful of both of us. Again, Game 6 right now, I imagine there's going to be a lot of Bucks tweeting that are going on.
I was just going to say, all right, Joe, we're wrapping it up. Go Bucks, right?
Right, go Bucks. And I'm sorry if you're going to be following me too, probably a few tweets of my son as well as we kind of continue on throughout the season. If you hear me bitch and moan about that, that's going to be happening. I can promise you.
This guy right here. All right. Cheers, guys.